Hi everyone. Thought it'd be kind of fun to look at a variety of ways that different artists make sure that their figures are incorporated into the scene. Now, the styles obviously are going to be quite different between all these artists. And I'm a landscape painter, so the way I handle figures is differently than someone like this first artist, the famous Mary White, who does more along the lines of a portraiture, and some other artists that we'll talk about too, where the figures are, front and center versus scattered around the landscape. But anyways, one of my main mantras when painting figures and when I'm teaching my students is to make sure your figures somehow are incorporated into the rest of the painting and not just kind of cut out and pasted on. And there's various ways to do that. So I just thought I'd show some fun examples here through these artists. So Mary White, her work stands out above all others, in my opinion, the way she handles figures. And it's not just because of her amazing talent and skill in painting the figures themselves. It's her great compositions and design. She puts a lot of thought into the whole entire painting. So composition and repetition in her work is the way to kind of make sure that her figures are integrated into the whole of the painting, even though they're kind of front and center and obviously the star of the show. So this girl here is, highly rendered. The quilt that she's holding, the background is nice and soft, but yet we still have this kind of repetition of elements going right from the flowers in the quilt right into the flowers of the background. Okay, that is not by happenstance or accident. Okay, Mary puts a lot of thought into those kinds of things throughout all of her paintings. You can see, and it's just one way to make sure that her figures, like I said, are incorporated and part of the whole and not just separated out. This one also deals with a beautiful color scheme where the colors themselves are, integrated and bounced back into the figure and what she's holding or what she's wearing. This one is a little more loose. Obviously, it's not one of her highly rendered finished paintings, but yet, and it's maybe a little bit simplistic, but the fact that the sheets are up here on the line still, and she's holding one in her hand, that's a nice way to make sure that the figure, once again, is integrated into the entirety of the painting. And again, these little touches of just this beautiful color scheme, the warmth in her skin tone is bounced up into here a little bit, those very subtle touches of brown. The blue of her outfit is also bounced up into that area and into the sheets. Okay, so just again trying to find ways that she is making sure her figures are all the way through there. This compositional, kind of an obvious compositional element of this with the diagonal of the umbrella handle, and it's almost like wind blowing her skirt, and all the rest of the background is all painted in kind of that same direction, almost like the figure is disappearing into the rain or coming out of the rain somehow. The umbrella is broken up with some of those strokes. Okay, making sure that those are some nice lost edges. So that's another beautiful way to do it. This is very similar to the first one that I showed you, as far as using composition. Once again, look at the repetition of this figure here and the basket that she's holding. Whoops. The basket that she's holding here, and then the basket here. And all these shapes just kind of continue right back, leading the viewer's eye not only just out, but also down in towards the star of the show here. So again, just a masterfully painted watercolor, but a lot of thought went into the composition and design ahead of time, and that it's that repetition that she manages so well. Here again, these shapes, if you kind of squint down at it, the shape right here of the girl's face with that highlight is very similar to the shape right below it. That strong shape with the warm there, and not just in that area, but here and here. Okay, so composition, repetition of shapes, it's very, very effective, even though we still have an obvious star of the show with her face there. I love this painting so much. There's so much softness to it. And again, this little it's not so much just the boy in the Lost Edges, but this look at those shapes, the chicken that the boy's holding. Those shapes are almost identical and mirrored into that background area. So he's not quite so isolated. Okay, there's a lot of contrast and emphasis placed on the young man, obviously. But down at the lower end here, his legs just start to the shapes and the colors of his tattered pants are right into the landscape around him. But primarily, this area is so well done, bouncing those two shapes back to make sure that that strong figure is part of its surroundings. This is a little bit more of not just repetition, I guess repetition of shapes, I suppose, but this shape, it's mirrored into the background down here into this shape, those nice kind of swirling feather shapes throughout, echoed into the brushstrokes into the background here, and it just brings the figure right into that nice dark surrounding behind her. Also, I mean, look at how beautiful this area is, those wonderful colors and the way it's just merging right into the chair. That is, oh man, she is just masterful with those lost edges. The composition and design of this one is a lot of just the steam coming off of the bowl of whatever that is, grits or oatmeal or something, I don't know. But that's another effective way using that kind of a lost edge, much like on the previous one. But this one now just making sure that she's just almost merging into that table that she's sitting there. And the smoke slowly making its way back towards the kitchen. Some very obvious kind of repetitions of shapes and colors and designs and patterns throughout this one too. But what's really struck me was this kind of area on her cheek mirrored up there. I'm not sure what that shape is, but that highlight and the subtle, going from that highlight to the cool to the warms down below there, it's almost that exact same kind of color scheme and handling as what you're seeing on the girl's cheek. Once again, very similar to, the boy holding the chicken to the laundry going back, just finding a way to, it's not obvious, okay? I mean, it's obvious when I point it out, but it's just one of those things that most people look at it and it just works, but the artist has spent a lot of time and thought, going into that to make sure that that composition is working better. Here again, the color scheme is obviously so simple, but the way that this area just on her blouse, the colors and the little shapes are mirrored in the larger format, but in the umbrella, very similar. And the little girl with the pinwheel here, that pinwheel shape that you're seeing here, is repeated down here into the quilt, and probably in a couple other areas up here too, where you're seeing those little patterns. So the choice of what she chooses, where she's placing the figure, what kind of an object is in the background with the figure, the bowl of oatmeal, the laundry, the quilt, whatever it might be. A lot of thought went into that to make sure that it's all working together. Mary White, master of figures. Charles Reed. Again, another one artist who did a lot of figurative work where the figure is obviously kind of front and center, but he is a master in making sure that his figures merge into their backgrounds. I think I've talked about this a little bit before too, the way when you're dealing with this, just making sure that some of those shapes and colors just bleed right out into the background from those shapes and not being a slave to the pencil line. Obviously, there's some areas where the pencil line is more prominent and you want some hard edges, but you don't want it so isolated that the figure is just so cut out. This is just a remarkable little sketch. Talk about, again, the lost edges and the way the figure is just merging into the surrounding there. You can't even tell where her seat ends and the stool that she's sitting on begins almost. It's just merging right into that shape, the way her hand is merging into the background, the easel that she's working on, even up there subtly. Okay, so he is just again just so masterful at letting these figures blend right into their seats, just like he did before. This is a very common theme throughout Charles Reed's figurative work. Even though they're strong portraits and the figures are very prominent, They're not cut out and pasted on. They're just included in with all the rest. And this is a little sketch again, but this is almost all just one shape. Everything in there, little color shifts and some little values on there afterwards. But he is one of a kind. There are some people that mimic his style, but you don't see it too often. And again, yes, you're going to have areas where maybe things are a bit more defined and hard-edged on the shoulder, but here that pencil mark is all that's separating the light side of her arm with the background. He's not filling that all in right there. Okay, that's I like the way he leaves his pencil marks on there and just lets the paint do its work. And then just some small little subtle areas, like I said, where her crossed leg is going right into the background there. Sorry, this one's a little blurry. It was a very small image, but I thought it was another great example of just letting the figure go right into the background. This is just awesome. Man, I love that painting. So strong and bold. And again, just making sure that there are areas that are a little less defined and incorporating the figures in over and over and over again. Going back into the background, going right into the background, merging into the sofa. And this girl, very similar to that one that I showed earlier, where she's just starting to merge right into the seat below her. That really helps to anchor the shapes down. It's very similar to when I talk about, when you're putting a figure in a painting, just making sure they're connected to their cast shadow, or you put a car in there, make sure the tires are on the ground by putting a shadow there and connecting it down in. You paint the boat and make sure its reflection comes right down from the boat to make it sitting in the water. It just anchors everything down and makes it look like they're not floating up above. So again, one last example. Many examples of his work doing that. So just another way to make sure your figures are part of the whole. Anna Ivanova, she does a lot of these ballerina type scenes, which I just love. And but this is her focus is definitely on edges. And it's so interesting. I just wanted to show this example here of this painting, the way she built it up. I found this example on just Googling her, but this almost looks like a preparatory painting, kind of working through where all the lost edges are. So going back to the original, the finished painting, much more refined and defined. But here she's just kind of playing around with the possibilities of all this, the softness and lost edges. And, obviously the choice of her subject matter, the ballerinas with their soft tutus, helps a lot. So you've got hard edges around their faces where you need it. But even in this one, their faces, there's a lot of instances where they're just merging into the background, which I just love. Those are such soft edges up here. That is an unbelievable control of the medium and the dampness of the paper and how much pigment and water is on your brush to get that to sit in there that softly, but yet stay as kind of an edge. That's remarkable. And then she has another kind of a preparatory sketch where it's much more graphically strong, and she doesn't have the background painting or a tone in the background, really. I don't know if this is a shadow or if she actually painted that, but much like Charles Reed's work but she doesn't even really have the pencil mark. She's just letting, this area, the light of the shoulder, go right back in. You don't need to define all those edges, okay? We know that her shoulder comes down here without her putting a pencil mark there or putting a darker wash there to make sure that that's popping out her shoulder, okay? Those techniques, you don't always have to do that. Let the viewer's brain finish it in. And very, subtle areas, the shadows or the light side of her face merging into the background, this figure too. There looks like there might be an earring coming down to define that. But just some of those lost edges to make sure that everything isn't just so cut out. Even on this one, like I said, that's more graphically strong and hard-edged. And then she kind of combines the two efforts together into this unbelievable finished painting, where you're seeing a little bit more of the soft edges again, a lot of it with the tutus and the legs and that kind of thing, all that softness merging in. So that combination, and this figure's face is more defined on this one, but the shoulder is still kind of a soft lost edge. And then these figures out here in the light are more treated like that graphically strong one Okay, so it's an I love that combination that she gets going here. They're not all the same, rendered the same way. The colors are a little bit different down here. The figures in shadow merging in, a lot of soft lost edges, a lot more sharp edges up here. Okay, so even though these figures are all very similar, your eye kind of still goes up into this area with that little bit more of a contrast and definition. But the eye just kind of goes through the whole painting. Absolutely remarkable. And again, another amazing example of sharp edges, lost edges. Okay. So again, Anna Ivanova, her masterful use of edges. John Singer Sargent is, it's kind of unusual going through a lot of his figurative work. Now, these are where the figures are a lot more prominent. He also has some watercolors in Venice where there's little, gondoliers and people milling about where they're smaller and they're not so prominent. But I wanted to kind of focus on some of these where the figures are more prominent. And this example is number one of the way his figures are one with the landscape. Okay, this very famous painting, The Hermit, where when you first see it, you almost don't even see the figure down here because he's just, again, one with the landscape, the way he treats them, the treatment of the colors, the brush strokes, everything. It's like they're just blending right into their surroundings. It's amazing. And it takes a little while to even see the deer standing right next to the hermit, those two deer in the dappled light. So this is a prime example of Sargent's mastery of making sure that his figures are one with the landscape. Another kind of fun example here with and this is more along with the shapes and things, a lot very similar to what Mary White did, but he does all these reclining figures, but sometimes it's hard to tell where one lady's dress ends and the other one begins, or where one of their billowing dresses ends and the background begins. Okay, they're just these big bold strokes. This is another example of just so much like the hermit. Her skirt, the legs of her skirt here are almost identical to the water, that treatment. So it's almost like he is purposely trying to make sure that his figures are not isolated. They're just one with their surroundings. Incredible treatment of these figures. And again here, but similar to the one with the ladies laying down before, there's areas where you just don't really, you almost can't even see where the figure ends and the background starts to begin. But I love the way this lady's hat is so gesturally painted, and so much of it is the style that he treats the figures with as well. He doesn't, he obviously gives them prominence there in the scene, but he doesn't change the technique or his brushstrokes between the way he's painting the background and the way he's painting the figures. Okay, these kinds of shapes that you're seeing in the figure are the same kind of shapes you're seeing up here in the rocks in the background, and that's important to make sure that they're all integrated in. Another one with the ladies just kind of merging into the background and the grass. Another great example of that figure where it's almost tough to see him at first glance. The way he's painted, I think this is more of a kind of a preparatory watercolor for a larger one, but this is another really good example of the way he makes sure that his figures are one with the landscape. So, and again, just paying attention to the way he handles the brush strokes and the color scheme and everything. This is an artist that's not as well known. He was very famous around the turn of the century. He was a very famous illustrator and watercolor artist, and I thought it was kind of cool because he was actually a medical illustrator too, which is kind of obvious when you see the accuracy of his figures is pretty remarkable. But Sir William Russell Flint, what I want to kind of focus on some of these examples here is the use of color scheme to make sure that the figures are integrated in. Now, obviously, these are more illustrative, his paintings, but he does a really nice job of, like I said, making sure that these colors, if you just kind of squint down at this scene and the way her scarf is bounced into these rocks back here, that's not a small thing. Okay, making sure that those color schemes are working, and the use of these little puddles and reflections, bouncing in, that's another nice trick to make sure your figures are incorporated in. The color scheme, the colors on this woman's back right here are almost identical to the colors right here and throughout the stone everywhere. Kind of that pearly glow that he gets on the women's flesh is again kind of mirrored all over the place into the rocks around them. Same thing, the flesh tone of the figures bounced all over up into here, same flesh tone into those colors. So a lot of it is just trying to, and the setting obviously depends on where you are. You can't always make sure that the skin tone matches that, but in a way we'll get to John Yardley later too, and his work does that a lot too. He's got a lot of these, a very kind of a simpler color palette in his paintings, and it just works. A lot of the same tones that you're seeing on the figures you're seeing in the background, because he doesn't go crazy with the color. This is one of the most colorful examples of Sir William Russell Flint's work, but then yet again you're seeing the blue in the figures will wrap here, the blue there, the blue here, okay, bouncing that color around throughout the landscape. Same thing, this orange right here bounced around up in here. So very colorful, but yet still very harmonious. Again, her skirt is almost the exact same as what you're seeing on the stone wall behind her. Her skirt is almost the exact same as this stone right down here. So you still have the contrast in the figures, and they're obviously, very prominent in the scene, but they are still incorporated in because of that nice use of a color scheme. I thought this was just brilliant, the way he has this shape, that color, and almost the exact same shape and color there. It just works so well. If you kind of cover this up with a blue or something, what a difference it would make. But this thing holds together so much more nicely because of that subtle little decision. Very limited color palette. It's almost just primaries, yellows, reds, and blues, right? I love it. It works very effectively. Again, nice, simple color scheme. This is just such an elegant, kind of on-the-spot watercolor painting, different from a lot of his other work. But once again, even though it's very colorful, you can see these colors just bouncing around throughout the painting, and the similar shapes as well. I mean, it's not, I'm pointing out examples of, a little bit more specific on each one of these artists, but they're all using edges and color and composition and everything. Obviously, there's more to it, but I'm just kind of highlighting different ways by using these examples and these figures. The color on their skin, again, almost the exact same color on the beach below them. And this one I just wanted to show mostly as an example of the importance of the fact that he was a medical illustrator and how amazing he is with anatomy. This figure leaning over on that stick, or the frame of the bridge there, is just absolutely remarkable. Another nice little colors bouncing around. The color of her suit is almost the exact same color that you're seeing up there in the water. So limited color palette, bouncing it around. The darks, the rich darks in there are bounced back in the background. The hat, almost the same color as the beach. And even the reds, it's a subtle red. It doesn't have to be screaming, standing out from the rest of it. And this is just a prime example of just such a beautiful limited color palette. Nice composition and design, little placements of shapes, slightly darker value of the shadow of the umbrella to highlight her shoulder. But again, you can almost see how this initial wash, the beach, almost just went right through the figure there, and then coming back in later to paint the arm and some of those shadows and to define her. Gorgeous paintings. So that is Sir William Russell Flint. On to John Yardley. Most of us are familiar with John Yardley's work. I pointed him out before. One of the interesting things about his, and again, this isn't all of his paintings, and he's not the only one that does it, but when I go through his books and examples of his work, I think one of the ways he makes sure that his figures are convincing and everything is he loves to choose these kind of populated subjects. So the shapes of the figures are repeated all over the scene. And just some examples of that, markets that you see out here. He also has this is where I kind of picked up a way to handle the figures where you're not putting too much of the facial features on them. It's more the angle, the slight tilt of the head, that you're seeing more hair here, and even just that small little shape of the ear there. That's remarkable. You know exactly the angle and the tilt of this woman's head by that little shape. The highlight on her hair, the dark hair, her chin is up just a little bit. Okay, and even just almost that pencil mark that you're seeing curved for the shape of her eyes. So you don't need that much definition. The little tilt of the head again, the different shape of it. You're seeing the jaw go out there that makes that lady look like she's looking the other way. And a lot like what I was talking about again, just to kind of relate them to other examples earlier, he doesn't change the style of his brushstroke or the way he handles them for the figures as he does for the architecture and trees and things behind him. These quick little dry brush strokes that you're seeing on their legs and their suits are the same kind of dry brush strokes you're seeing out here on the windows. Okay, so that's very important as well. He's not changing what he's doing or slowing down immensely and treating the figures as a completely different or in a completely different style from the rest of their surroundings. That's very important. But again, these kind of populated subjects are a great way to make sure your figures are in there. So I know you can find examples of John Yardley where it's just his wife sitting on a bench or whatever. But it is kind of nice when you're painting these more urban scenes and populated scenes that you get a handle on making sure your figures are all just kind of abstractly put in. Concerts, markets, okay, an outdoor concert. And again, the color scheme, the blue of the chairs bounced in there up into the band shell. Busy fish market or something outdoors. Very abstract. Another one, the street scene. So these are the toughest scenes to tackle with the multitude of figures the way he does, but he's one of the best at it, his populated scenes. Excuse me. And then getting into Edward Seago here, we're almost done. What he is a master of, and going back to John Yardley, and just because I'm a landscape painter, I tend to paint or pay a little bit more attention to these types of artists who put figures into the landscape and not like Mary White or Anna or Charles Reed, who put their figures are like front and center. I don't do a lot of portraiture work, so I'm a little bit more interested and focused on the way they handle them in the landscape. So, but the simplification of Ed Seago's figures is amazing, and so a little bit different. John Yardley simplifies his figures quite a bit too, but these are, in order to make sure that his figures are there but not taking over everything. He has just done an unbelievable job of just like putting a face and a shadow side on there. These little shadows are so convincing. These little backlit figures are a common theme in Ed Seago's thing too, where it's just one simple little shape. Backlit figures, all four of those shapes, the mule and the three figures, are one shape connected in there. So simple, so effective. Okay, but that's a nice way to make sure your figures are in the scene but not taking over. And the way he joins again the figure riding the mule with the bags and the load on it into one simple shape. Backlighting helps, of course. Okay, when you're doing that, but even when the figures are in the sunlight, he really simplifies the light side, shadow side into really just two shapes, and keeps them nice and simple. But that's a very effective way to get your figures into the scene. Again, the figures in the sunlight, so the dark shape behind them, and then just the darker pants. These figures are strongly backlit, connected, simplified into one little shape. Same thing. Simplified, backlit a little bit. This figure in the light, a little bit more prominent than this case, but still simplified just absolutely beautifully. So just letting the face go into the shirt, into the arm, into the skirt, into the legs. You don't have to change the way and leave gaps and holes and everything. Nice little effective, simple figures scattered about. And then I just thought I'd show a few of mine. So I'm kind of somewhere residing in the middle of all of it. Sometimes my figures, I just did this in my workshop that I had, online workshop this past week as an example. But when I do the value studies, especially with figurative work, is just a way to make sure that I'm finding ways to connect the figures, into the background, and then you come back in and use the dark. So initially this whole area here was all middle value, so that guy was in there, and then you can come back in and put his dark jacket on, make sure the shadows on the ground go right through the figures. Okay. So again, by a little bit of a combination of both, that neutral tint of his jacket was back there in the railings. Okay. So, and I try to, again, if a figure is very prominent, this is a little bit more of that, I called this one certain symmetry, because of the similarity in the shapes between her, obviously there, the laundry hanging up there, and the nun's headwear there. But this figure is merging into the background a little bit. His legs are unfinished. So that's an example of kind of using the similar compositional element. I like this figure. Again, he's pretty prominent, but this is an example, kind of like what I was saying with John Yardley's work on the tilt of the head and stuff. Even though it's very simple, just kind of, it was a tricky perspective, but making sure that the placement of the guy's head kind of forward on the shoulders, looks like he's carrying that heavy mooring ball in his arm. The tilt of the cap going down. There's not a lot of detail there. It's just light side, shadow side again, right? These guys, this similar color scheme that you're seeing in the construction workers wear is back, back over here in the orange barrels and stuff, the construction one. So that's a little bit of bouncing the colors around. And again, just the basic kind of a complementary color scheme of the blues and oranges. I do love to try and capture a nice gesture with my figures too. That's one of the things that I try and pay attention to. Very simple shape here of that figure, but the fact that he's that little bit of an action of his leg out, and even her with a leg up and stuff, wearing a mask. This was during COVID. Okay, just trying to keep things nice and simple like that, but still paying attention to kind of a convincing gesture is something that I try to do. And then again, this is also bounced into the same color scheme of the trees, okay, for some harmony there. And every once in a while, my figures are a lot more prominent. This is the painting that I have in the TWSA show right now. So it's kind of fun to zoom in on figures once in a while too. But even then, I try to, really pay attention to try and keep the shapes as simple as possible. The arm here of the figure going back under the elbow and then back down in, and kind of showing those things a lot like Sir William Russell Flint. My background as a medical illustrator helps me with anatomy a little bit. Just even the subtle thing is like a forearm or the shape of the kid's head. But again, just simple little gestures, making sure that the figures in water and reflections, going back again to some of those previous examples, nice way to show that they're integrated into the scene. Simple little gestures of the figures, but and again, the little colors there, the white and darks, are the same as in the van as what you're seeing there. A lot of these figures back there, kind of the dusty clothing of the immigrants. What they're wearing, working out in the field, bounced around. Simple little gestures of figures. So again, my style is unlike pretty much anybody. It's a combination of things. Like all of us, we have our influences, and after a while you get your own little style. So I try to keep things loose, but yet also pretty convincing with just by trying to find an accurate gesture in the figures. And then this painting, the last one here, was one that I was all about capturing gestures. I was sitting there coming back from walking to get the mail, and the kids walking into school, and they all just had a slightly different kind of a pose as they walked across the street. And I thought it was super fun just to try and capture that variety and not just go into that boring, repetition of painting the same thing over and over again, just making them each a little bit unique, but yet very simple. And I'm not they're so far away, you couldn't put faces or anything on them either, but the proportions and stuff, and obviously it helps that there's an adult behind them to make them look like little school children walking across the street. So anyways, that wraps it up. I just thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about different ways to handle the figure. I know they're very tricky. to keep simple. And but if you can find ways either through composition, color scheme, the way you handle the brush strokes, not changing it, keep them as part of the whole in your paintings, and it'll make a big difference. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hi, my name's Andy Evansen. Over the course of this year, I'll be discussing a lot of ways to improve your paintings with a focus on watercolor in particular. Watercolor is a popular medium, but there are technical issues that can become stumbling blocks during the learning process. The painting becomes a lot more fun once you solve them and can start refining your craft. I'll cover topics that are unique to watercolor, such as painting wet and wet, the timing and consistency of your washes, the importance of drawing and negative shape making, and more. I'll also be talking a lot about how vital it is to have a plan. Transparent nature of watercolor means you're limited in the amount of fixing you can do once you've started, and indecisiveness, that's what leads to the weak, muddy paintings. Because this course spans a calendar year, you'll be able to see me painting outdoors on location as well as in the studio. We can talk about the differences and similarities of both. I've taught dozens of 3 to 5 day workshops, and most of the time, just as students are starting to figure things out, it's time to say goodbye. This course through Tucson Art Academy Online allows me to work with you for an entire year, so we'll be able to get into things that just aren't possible in a 4-day workshop. As an artist who also loves to teach, I'm really excited about the possibilities of this. I hope you'll join me.